Good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Ulozas. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a third-year environmental engineering student at Rutgers. I'm a second-year Women's Leadership Scholar, the chair of the Student Advisory Board, and I'm so grateful to have you all here today. Last year, 85% of US youth admitted they are moderately worried or worse about climate change. In all 50 states, regardless of their genders, sexualities, religions, backgrounds, races, young people are scared for their future. And it is clear why. As time goes on, these fears have only been amplified. The environmental crisis is stretching well beyond the Earth. It affects our physical health, our mental wellness, and our communities. However, these emotions are a so powerful motivation for change. Behind every activist, including those in this room, is a feeling, a moment where you felt an emotion, fear, sorrow, anger, even joy, so strongly it inspired you to connect with others and fight. Many of these emotions could have been paralyzing, letting us fall into despair and doom. But with courage, uncertainty and fear turn into action. Climate justice is a global movement, as we'll learn later today. It requires us to step out of our social bubbles and unite for our home. This is where environmentalism and this movement needs young people. We have mastered the art of building an international community online. Many of us have grown up connected to one another in a profoundly new, innovative way. 37% of US Gen Z have already engaged in climate activism. In New Jersey alone, there are over 600 environmental organizations. While today is about learning and understanding the climate crisis, it is also a celebration of all the work the people in this room have done. Above all, though, this symposium is a call for action, for us to be empathetic, compassionate, and kind in our work to protect the Earth. Thank you. Our first panel today is called Bridging Science and Action, Research for a Sustainable Future. We have three incredible panelists here today, in person and on Zoom, if you look to your right and left. Today we'll be discussing how science is responding to and helping us combat the climate crisis. First, we have Dr. Gretta Pecl joining us on Zoom. Dr. Pecl is a professor of marine ecology at the Institute for Marine and Antarctic Studies at the University of Tasmania. She's also the director for the Center of Marine Socioecology. Her work focuses on how climate change affects marine species, ecosystems, and coastal communities. She's a lead author for the IPCC AR6 report and leads REDMAP, an international citizen science initiative. Next, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Julie Lockwood, Director of the Rutgers Climate and Energy Institute. Dr. Lockwood is a global leader in invasive species research and their effect on biodiversity and our ecosystems. She is a fellow of both the Ecological Society of America and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Lastly, I would like to introduce Dr. Debashish Bhattacharya, a distinguished professor in the Department of Biochemistry and Microbiology at Rutgers. His lab focuses on marine conservation, including coral conservation and algal evolution. Dr. Bhattacharya is also a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Moderating alongside me today is Dr. Lili, an assistant research professor in the Department of Environmental Sciences at Rutgers. She's also the co-director of Rutgers Impact Studies of Climate Intervention. Her research primarily focuses on two climate scenarios: stratospheric aerosol climate intervention, and nuclear war. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to pass the floor to Lili to start us off with our first question.
I think first, let's go around for all our panelists to give a very short introduction of their research or their concern about the current climate situation. So let's start with Gretta on Zoom.
Thank you for the invitation. I really wish I could be there today for all the reasons that we've heard mentioned in the introduction. I wanted to start off with a really quick acknowledgement of country for where I am, which is Nupalina Lutruwita, or Hobart, Tasmania. I live and work on the land, seas, waterways and sky country of the Muanina people and the Palawa and Pakana that continue to care for country to this day. They've got an extraordinary depth and breadth of knowledge about these lands that were never ceded. So I'm a marine ecologist, and before I started my career, I really had no idea how important our oceans are. They are 95% of the space that can support life. They're home to millions of species. It produces half of the oxygen on our planet, so every second breath we take is thanks to the ocean, regulates our climate and weather, and so many other really important aspects of the ocean. And apparently, changes that can seem quite small in the ocean in terms of the temperature and the pH level, for example, can have really large differences in terms of, or really large impacts for biology and ecology. And climate change is absolutely a marine issue. This graph here shows the heat content of the land in the little orange strip along the bottom there, and the heat content of the ocean. And you can see that the ocean really is absorbing most of that additional heat that's trapped in the atmosphere by those greenhouse gases, by the emissions from fossil fuels, for example. So the ocean traps 90% of that additional heat, and if we didn't have the ocean doing that job, we would be almost 12 degrees or approximately 12 degrees warmer on land already. So the ocean is an absolutely critical aspect of saving us to some degree from climate change. But the pressures and the demands on the ocean are really increasing. It's becoming a very crowded space in coastal environments. There's a lot of competition for blue economy type activities, renewable energy, conservation, fisheries, all sorts of intense activities happening in the ocean. And again, even though we have all of these demands on the ocean, everyone's looking towards the ocean for solutions to climate change. But these oceans themselves are really changing fast. If we look at my home region, for example, Tasmania, the east coast of Tasmania is warming at almost 4 times the global average. So it's one of the fastest warming regions in the world globally, and it's likely to remain so for the foreseeable future. And last year, in fact, 70% of our ocean territory was in a technical marine heatwave at some point or another throughout the year. And in fact, the world globally, half the oceans were in a heat wave at some point in 2023 and in 2024. These changes in temperature have huge impacts. Just where I am in Tasmania, the distribution of species has changed so much. We've had poleward expansions of sea urchins that have been eating all of the kelp and seaweed and turning our east coast into rocky urchin barrens. We've got new octopus species turning up, lots of intertidal species that have moved further polewards as well, dozens of fish, heaps of seaweeds. So there really is this redistribution of life in the southern hemisphere where I am. Species are moving south as our oceans warm up. Northern hemisphere where you are, things are moving north, closer to the poles. And that redistribution of life really is quite dramatic. IPCC estimates that 50% of life on Earth has already shifted as a function of climate change. And some of these changes in distribution can relate to toxic species like algal blooms, for example, which here in Tasmania had a massive effect on our oyster aquaculture industry. And this redistribution of species is often called the fingerprint of climate change, but trying to understand that, particularly in a country like Australia where we have this massive coastline and a relatively small population, is quite difficult. And so we started the REDMAP project, or the Range Extension Database and Mapping Project, which invites contributions from anybody in the public to send in photographs of species that they think or know are unusual for that given area. So we're trying to detect, as an early indication, these species that are shifting further south for us as our oceans further south warm up. And it's been such a successful program. We've had submissions all around the country. It's been going for 15 years now. We've just released a decadal report card assessment, and it's been really successful in many ways. It's essentially just taking observations and pictures from the community and turning it into data to help us understand how our marine ecosystems are changing. And data and publications from REDMAP have been included into policy documents like the State of Environment Report for Australia and the IPCC report as well. But more importantly to me, we've got is the evaluation showing that the project's really helping people to understand climate change and that they trust the information being disseminated by our project. And that involvement and engagement of people in climate change is really critical. We've hit 1.5 degrees in terms of temperature increase already above that pre-industrial level. Our emissions are actually still increasing. So our challenge is increasing, and yet we're still paying fossil fuels to emit these emissions into the environment. So it's incredibly important that we try and engage people in ways that are really meaningful, that they feel like they're doing something useful, that they're having a contribution, because we really need to make some significant progress very quickly. Even though we've hit 1.5 degrees and we've got emissions increasing, there are some reasons for very cautious optimism around climate change. We've got lots of technological advances and changes in financial markets, for example. The cost of solar power has dropped. 80% of new electricity generation is from renewables. So there's a whole lot of reasons for us to feel optimistic. We've got all of these tools that we need to decarbonise. We've just got to do it faster. And I just wanted to finish off by saying, even though, we hear these facts and figures about the rate of temperature increase and the rate of emissions, our future is not fixed. There is still, great opportunity for us to really do the best that we can to reduce these impacts as much as possible. And the difference between the trajectory you can see there that doesn't look great in the grey and the trajectory in the blue there that looks much more positive it's not necessarily about science. It's about people. It's about our choices, our behaviour, our values, our decisions, political will, all of those things. And that's why I'm really excited to be part of the conference here today, because I really do think that these kinds of events and climate activism is really critically important, because it's people and our values and our decisions that are really the problem and the gap at the moment. It's not really our scientific knowledge per se. So I'll end there, and I'll look forward to hearing from the other participants and then answering some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Gretta. Thank you for the great introduction for your research. And so let's move to Julie.
So I want to talk a little bit about my interest in research associated with thinking about nature as a climate solution. So the idea here is that, so if you ever heard the term nature-based solution, so I'll define it for you here, and that's the idea that natural ecosystems, or even anything alive ecosystems, can provide two forms of a climate solution. One of them is to buffer us, our whatever it is about us that we want to buffer against the effects of climate change, in terms of rising sea levels, ocean acidification, storms, coastal storms, flooding, river flooding, all those actions, or to reduce those. Natural ecosystems help buffer us or mitigate those impacts. So good examples of those include salt marshes or dunes along our coast. So we feel that very strongly in New Jersey, that if you have intact dunes in front of your town, the chances that your town is going to get flooded because of any kind of flooding, either storm flooding or what we call sunny day flooding now, which means that the town, or you're getting flooding on a sunny day, it's not storm related, it's just high tides and a rising sea. And so your town becomes a part of the ocean during those moments, not because of a storm, but because the sea is rising and rising. So if you have an intact salt marsh or an intact dune between you and the ocean, the chances that that happens, or that you can direct that flooding to someplace that's not so detrimental, goes up. So having those intact ecosystems, that's a nature-based solution, right? Same thing happens when we're here in New Jersey, in New Brunswick. The Raritan River floods regularly. So you can also think about nature-based solutions as intact forests. So for us, that means all the forests and the headwaters of the Raritan River. So having an intact forest in that sort of setting intercepts rain when it's coming down in droves, keeps it from hitting the ground and immediately running into the water, which then keeps that from all running down into the tributary and then eventually into New Brunswick, flooding our roads, right? So just having that intercept, having trees that capture that in the soil and send it straight down into our groundwater instead of it running off and going into the river and coming to us. So having intact forests anywhere along a river watershed is very helpful in terms of keeping those flooding, that flash flooding down, or preventing it to happen to begin with. So those are all nature-based solutions and things that we're interested in here in my lab. The other way you can think about nature as a solution is its ability to capture or pull carbon out of the atmosphere. And so Gretta mentioned this relative to the oceans. They do a hefty job actually in terms of pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and into the ocean. And hopefully from the top of the ocean down to the deep part of the ocean so it stays for a very long time and out of our atmosphere, helping to reduce the rate at which the world is warming. Forests and other plants do the same thing because of the miracle of photosynthesis, right? So if you recall from if you have to go all the way back to high school, all the photosynthesis equations you had to learn, what goes in, what goes out in photosynthesis? Well, what goes in is carbon dioxide. And you fix that carbon and turn it into little plant material or tree material or microorganism material in the soil, and then out goes oxygen, which we depend on. But the big thing for us is that that CO2 gets pulled in from the atmosphere and gets stored in the trees, but even better when it gets pushed down into the soil and buried and kept down in the soil for a very long time. So that whole idea of nature as a solution in terms of pulling carbon out of the atmosphere is another form of nature as a solution. That solution actually has a market around it. We call those carbon markets. So I had a student in one of my classes last year, when I got to this part of the class, says, I can make money out of just having a forest. I'm like, yes, you can. So if you can show that that forest is pulling more carbon out of the atmosphere than it would have if you hadn't bought it and done something to it, managed it correctly, kept it from being cut, then yes, you can make money and sell those carbon credits on a market. For us in New Jersey, that's a voluntary market. For other places in the world, it's a mandatory market. The idea being you use market forces to help us reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere, and that market can be used to purchase and manage forests or other ecosystems that do a really good job of pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it for a long time. One of the pieces of my research is what is the biodiversity benefits of these of these nature-based solutions. So what I have here is, one of the pieces up there is just a little quick, easy thing to understand what a carbon market is relative to a forest and then how it relates to emissions of carbon. But the other part is that not all forests are the same, right? So any tree photosynthesizes, but what tree you plant in a carbon offset sort of setting, or what kind of ecosystems that you want to put on a market to pull carbon dioxide out, matters a lot in terms of biodiversity. So if you look at that top one on the left there, to me, on my left, that's clearly a planted forest. How do I know? They're all in a straight row. Anytime you see anything that's straight rows in nature or outside, then you know that's people. That's a hallmark of people. So this is pulling in a lot of carbon dioxide, but it's not holding a lot of biodiversity. It's the exact same tree species planted, all the exact same age, in the exact same format. So it's not really, it will hold some species besides the trees, but not a lot of them. You compare that to a forest that you could have put that same money in terms of a carbon market to an intact or relatively intact tropical forest, which is down on the left. You can imagine just from looking at that, your body just goes biodiversity. There's biodiversity there. You recognize that that's a place where you're going to get a lot of species that you care about and potentially some rare or endangered species. even when you move to the right there, that looks, suspiciously, they're not in straight rows. So that's your field sign that this is an intact ecosystem, even though it looks like it's all one species, and it mostly is. These are longleaf pines. So longleaf pine ecosystems are one of the most endangered ecosystems in North America. The only place you'll find them is in the southeast. And they're home to some incredible, cool, like this is my biology, ecology, like some eastern indigo snakes and gopher tortoises and all kinds of really cool stuff. But that is the picture of an intact, perfectly functioning longleaf pine ecosystem. So that also pulls carbon out of the atmosphere and at the same time has a biodiversity benefit. So biodiversity conservation and this nature-based solution does not necessarily have to coincide, even though we always say nature. My goal is to see how can we get those two things to align more regularly. But I hope kind of leaving this is that there's a lot of ways for us to use nature to help us both pull down the amount of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, but to also help us adapt to what is inevitably and going to be increasing impacts of climate change on our life moving forward. So these are sort of the pieces that I see in thinking about how my training interfaces with a lot of the topics that we'll be talking about today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. I think you already touched the question we're going to discuss later about nature-based solution. And later we're going to talk more about different kind of solutions, nature-based or technological-based solutions. So let's welcome Debashish to give us his
Thank you.
talk.
I'm going to have to ask you to advance. 'Cause I did the horrendous thing of putting animations in my slides. So I'm in the biochemistry and microbiology department, and I'm an evolutionary biologist, but we do a lot of different things. And something kind of really important happened about, I would say, 5 or 6 years ago. I often interview many people who want to do a PhD or postdoc in our lab. Turned out that virtually all of them were young women, and they had a very important thing to tell me, is that they said, Debashish, we want to make a difference. And I have written probably 200-300 papers on basic science. What makes a eukaryote cell, how do things become photosynthetic, and how do they integrate, all sorts of stuff. And this is something that really changed me and our lab. And we thought, okay, we have to serve society in some tangible way. So that's when we shifted our work from doing molecular biology and what we call genomics and stuff into actually coming up with solutions that might be beneficial to society, that opened the door to many foundations and so on, saying that's cool, we want to do it. And it really is a fantastic thing that happened later in my career, but I've been very thankful for. So we work on two really big problems, and I'll talk a little bit about one, and I'll talk about the corals in the second slide. The first one is this on the bottom you see here. This is a beach in the Dominican Republic where we do some work in a place called the Marine Innovation Hub, and that's sargassum. So this is a seaweed that originates in Sargasso Sea, everybody's heard about. Ocean gyres kind of keep it in this limited area. But what's happened is that as the climate has warmed, the nutrients are run off in the ocean, and, well, something really odd happened, and that is that there was a major drought in West Africa, and it blew a bunch of nutrient-rich soil into the ocean. So now we have something called the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt. So this is maybe 25 to 50 million metric tons of floating seaweed that's south of the Sargasso Sea, which is shown in green there. So if you want to get an idea about the scale of how climate change and sort of human activities can impact the planet, this Great Sargassum Belt didn't exist. Now it exists, and it's massive, and it's dropping seaweeds all over the Caribbean shorelines. So that's a big problem because, well, it's bad for tourism, but even worse is when the seaweeds decay, they release noxious gases like hydrogen sulfide that are really problematic. So I'm part of a sort of a large consortium which the Schmidt Sciences is funding to turn that waste seaweed into bioproducts and to find a use for something that's actually very, very dangerous and also a major pest in the region. So when I entered the field, I thought, how are we going to do this, right? Because, so I thought, okay, what is the most advanced sort of diagnostics thing we have in the world? It's called human health, right? There's billions of dollars and thousands of people have been working in this area. And so that little circle that you don't have to read all the stuff, essentially, you have basic science, which is on the, at about 2 o'clock. And then that basic science gets applied to other species. So you maybe work on yeast or the fruit fly, then that start to study that in humans, then you try to bring that, see how that may play a role in disease, then you try to maybe develop drugs or understand patients. Ultimately, this is the sort of the virtuous circle that the biomed field in human health does. So we thought, well, why should we reinvent the field? Let's just do what they do, but let's apply it to environmental problems. And the way that we did that is we were fortunate that instead of having to slog through years and years of collecting data, it turns out there was this massive revolution that happened in science called omics, and that stands for genomics, transcriptomics, metabolomics, proteomics, shown there. What it allows you to do is it allows you to capture huge amounts of what's called big data, but then there's lots of sophisticated bioinformatic tools that allow us to really understand how species work, understand what stresses them, and maybe figure out how to prevent that. So this is what is sort of, in our lab, the coming together. Societal need to do something about climate change, existing model from the human health field, and a bunch of really advanced tools that allow us to apply it and do it in a much more rapid way than was possible in previous generations. Okay, so we've taken that sort of approach, which I'm very happy to talk about and discuss with you later, and we've applied to another major problem, which is the loss of coral reefs. So as you know, coral reefs house about 25% of marine biodiversity, but more importantly, they are critical to the regions where they're found, which are often sort of island nations that don't have a lot of money. They're bearing the brunt of our climate change, but they're losing fisheries, they're losing the protection of their shorelines as the sea level rises and the corals no longer function. That's called bleaching, where the warming waters that Gretta so clearly showed you is what leads to them losing their algal symbionts that give them their nourishment. So this is a massive problem in Australia, in the Caribbean, in Micronesia, all over the world. So our goal here was to come up, using that little paradigm, come up with ways of diagnosing health, trying to mitigate it, and allowing people to have a plan to maintain their reefs. And that would usually be reducing tourism, reducing fisheries, doing things that can have a positive role. And so just like in the human health field, we've come up with a way of turning our omics knowledge from doing all these methods. And then, so we do this little half virtuous circle where we get to an understanding of the coral reefs, and then we work with the people who are living in the reef. So we work with people in Micronesia, in the Ulithia Atoll. We work with people in the Caribbean. We work with people. So our goal is to turn this knowledge, which is useful scientifically, but actually is more useful to turn into tools. And that's the final part of what we do in our lab, is that we develop with engineers and other people tools that will allow you to diagnose the health of your coral in the field. So we've developed the first COVID-19 type lateral flow assay. It's just a simple paper strip without any plastic waste that a person can take a bit of a coral, put it on, that'll tell you the level of a stress protein. We're also working on more sophisticated tools like having microfluidic devices and a number of other things. But really what we're doing here is we're trying to deal with a huge problem by taking the massive amount of knowledge that exists already in the world of human health and trying to turn it into something that's actionable and can be useful for people in corals, and it actually can be used for any marine resource, shellfish, seaweeds, it doesn't really matter. These are a set of tools and approaches. So I'm happy to discuss any of that. I'm super happy to be here, and thanks for your attention.
That's great. That's great. It's very fantastic. So before we dive into the first question, let me just follow up with Debashish's talk and just tell you a story, a little bit about myself. So I think Julie and Debashish all talked about solutions. I'm going to tell you a very crazy solution now. That's basically my research, and I want to tell you, starting from 2010, when I still just graduated from college, I read a paper on science. It's about climate change is going on, what can we do? And two distinguished professors, scientists, published a paper and said there's nothing we can really pull the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere right now. It will be there for hundreds of years. And this is the time we need to seriously think about another solution called geoengineering at that time. And later they changed it to climate intervention, because if you say engineering, that means you know what you're doing. But actually for this kind of solution, we don't know what are we doing. We don't know all the consequences. So people recommend we don't use geoengineering, we use climate intervention. So I read the paper, and it was written by a professor at Rutgers, Dr. Alan Roebuck. And it's about, let's try to mimic volcano eruption and trying to put some sulfate into the atmosphere high enough, which it can stay there for years. And it will serve as a kind of umbrella, blocks the sunlight. With less sunlight reaching the surface, then we will have a cooler environment on the surface. So I was like, oh, am I reading a scientific fiction? But then I feel this idea is so crazy. Then I went to his office and said, do you have funding to support PhD student? I want to study with you. Because it's very similar to what Debashish mentioned, female students approach to him and ask the question about science and also want to make an impact. It's very similar to me. I am right now still an early career scientist. Not that early, but still. But I mean, I know there are so many advanced and sophisticated science going on, modeling and everything, physics. But I really want to know, for this crazy idea about climate intervention, what does that mean to our society? What does that mean to ecosystem? So I started my PhD and looking at, first, I focused on food security, agriculture, how this will change agricultural productivity over different countries, different regions. And I can tell you the first meeting I went to for this climate intervention, actually the first meeting is still at Rutgers here in 2011. There were only 2 female scientists, and I was one of them. And all others are all males, like white and very distinguished professors talking about temperature and precipitation climate models. And I was the only one there presenting my just started research about how this might change agriculture. And people are looking at me like, why you are talking about agriculture? Are we just talking about temperature here? And for me, for years, I've been really working hard in this field, trying to convince people, instead of just looking at global temperature precipitation, we need to look at what does that mean to different communities on Earth. I work with developing country researchers, Philippines, Malaysia, and South Africa people looking at if we do this kind of crazy climate intervention, what does that mean to their local community, like the precipitation, flooding change, the frequency, intensity change? What does that mean to their agriculture, livestock? What does that mean to their health impact? Because what you put in the atmosphere, it will fall down. And the distribution will be different than the current air pollution. So it might affect some regions. They are not really affected a lot right now. So basically, that's my background. I am very excited to be here and talk with you because I think what I am researching on is it's more urgent to have action, to really talk with people, to build up the connections, and to not really advertise climate intervention. But for me, the reason I'm researching this is because I think it's urgent to tell people about this idea and to tell people to look around to see, is there any expert we can bring into this field and to see what would be the impact if in the future any government or any just rich people decided to do this kind of crazy experiment. Even just one person decided to do it. It's not that expensive. It will have global impact, will impact everyone. So I think it's the time, let's move to the first question. And I think since we talked about research, we are all scientists here doing research in the lab on the model. And we need to talk with communities, governments, and the policymakers, stakeholders. So maybe the first question, let's talk more about, based on your experience and all your research, what do you see the gaps there between your research and how we can put our research into action? So any of you wants to start?
I'm the least qualified to answer that question, but I can tell you one thing is that when our work in Micronesia in Ulithi Atoll, where they were seeing sort of an opportunistic coral taking over. Believe it or not, there are actually corals that grow very fast and they take over ecosystems and the fish don't live there anymore. The greatest joy I had from that is that we actually met with the tribal elders and the chiefs they give us permission to work there, and we work with the people. And so we did this omic stuff, and we made a genetic connectivity map of it's a massive atoll. And we said, okay, here are the places we think you should avoid and so on. And the chief said, yep, that's what we'll do. So I can tell you that as a scientist my entire life, the greatest joy was to be able to do science, come up with a plan, and talk to somebody, and that person said, that sounds like a plan, we'll do that. We'll moderate our fishing activities to make sure that the most endangered reefs are not going to be used. So this is what I see in terms of what we're doing. The other part of it, and I'll just say this in a very short fashion, is that like I was talking about the medical field, there are massive problems in human health that we know how to solve, right? There's type 2 diabetes, there's dietary problems. We know how to solve them, yet we cannot solve them. We can only make tools to deal with it. It's pretty much the same thing with climate change problems. We know how to solve it. We just can't get human societies to come together to do it. So I think in a way, I'll leave the other people to speak more specifically about sort of the politics of it. But for me, that is the greatest frustration, is that we cannot summon the will to do something. And it's across all things, not just climate change, many, many things that humans are creating problems. The solutions are there, but we can't do it. So my joy story was to actually work with somebody who had the direct power to enact our recommendations. And I think that's
That's a great example, which remind me about the ozone depletion and the Montreal Protocol. And at that time, Susan Solomon, a very distinguished scientist, when the journalist asked her about why do you think like all nations agree on Montreal Protocol, and she said there are three critical conditions if we really want to solve something. The first thing is personal. So everyone needs to feel it. With the ozone hole, everyone can feel if there's a skin cancer. Everyone feel it's very risky. It's very dangerous. So everyone wants to react. And the second thing is perceptible. Everyone needs to see the change. And then the third thing is we need to have practical solutions. So I think but Shishi just said we have the solution, there's always a solution, but the thing is trying to communicate with people and make them really feel this is personal. We need to make sure the communication is efficient to trying to tell everyone, this will affect your personal life, your family. Then everyone feel it, then everyone wants to put action on it. So that's just great. Let's just keep our discussion.
Do you want to see if Gretta wants?
Gretta?
Yeah, go for it.
Go for it, yeah.
Yeah, so I think one of the best things that happened to me as an ecologist was the opportunity to work in an interdisciplinary way. And I think when, we started working with economists and social scientists and environmental psychologists and media experts and artists and Indigenous scholars in something that we've called the Centre for Marine Socioecology. And that's been an absolute game changer in terms of the way that I think about the research that I do, the way that we approach having impact. And I think, working in an interdisciplinary way forces you in many ways to also think of the whole system, not just, as a marine biologist, I'm really interested in the ocean, but the only levers that we have to pull are the people. It's the people that do the things to the ocean that have the impacts. And so we have to think about that theory of change when we have our result, when we have our research, or even preferably before we get to the result, when we're in the planning stages, we need to think about what's that theory of change, what's that process that I want to try and facilitate to get the research to the end user, whoever that is. And Lili's mentioned so many fantastic sort of ways already of trying to do that. But I think another thing that all of us could do is to also be a bit more savvy or informed about the information economy, the world that we live in, and the way that knowledge is generated, used, trusted, transmitted is just totally different now. And we really have to, as a society, I think, get on board with understanding misinformation and disinformation and human psychology and what motivates us to be more engaged with different information or not. And there's lots more I could say on that, but I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Gretta. That's great. I mean, the gap is not just between science and the general public, but the gap is inside the scientific community already. So we need more interdiscipline collaboration. It's not just one expert working on one area and then publish the result, but we need to really work interdiscipline with different colleagues together and then send out the message. So Julie, you have...
Yeah, so the only thing I'll add to that is the engagement with business, especially large business, right, or businesses or industries, because one of the other impacts of the changes we've seen globally is that these large industries and these businesses transcend a country, right? So if you can get them to buy into a sustainability model or to invest in something that they see as valuable, relative to their own interests or to, well, it's always in their own interest, but it could be reputational, but it could be just business, part of their bottom line. Some of those things have a climate component. So instead of always, there's plenty of reasons to demonize international global business, but there are other, I have worked with strange bedfellows in this area where their interests are very much in line with mine in terms of scaling renewable energy, citing it correctly, and helping in terms of either climate solutions or in any kind of climate solution. So one of the main things that I do from my end in a science point of view is engage in that in a way so that it's transparent what they're doing and making sure they're not just greenwashing you, right? And I will say that they often are not, but sometimes someone has their ear. I'm not sure they're always aware of the fact that they're greenwashing it because someone is selling them a bag of goods that's not informed by science. So as a scientist, sort of engaging with those folks, it's like, no, here's how you do it. Here's how you do it well. It's not rocket science and how to do it well. Here's how you sort of make it real in terms of something on the ground and pulling carbon from the atmosphere and helping biodiversity. So let's do it right. Let's partner with the right people. Let's make it an evidence-informed process that should help you in terms of your reputational or bottom line, but it also helps otherwise. So that was not a place that I thought I would be engaging in my research. It's like, oh, great, you're going to work with ExxonMobil? Really? So, but as they, so there's moments where I'm like, am I really working with ExxonMobil? I'm not sure. That's weird. But there are things that they are trying to do that I see that is very much in the right direction. And so instead of sort of shunning it and saying good luck, it's sort of saying, great, let's make it real. So that would be my plug.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important to work with industry, and also I think in the field there are a lot of philanthropists. They are interested, and those private funding get into this field and trying to bring people's attention, and also trying to outreach more policymakers or governments. So I can talk about like the field I'm working with. Actually, it's very interesting. For climate intervention, the majority majority of the funding, it's not from the government, it's from private fundings. So a lot of rich people, wealthy families, they are interested to trying to look at this weird solution of climate change. Also, people may take it as some homeland security issue or something like that. So what I see there is those private funding, they have specific interest. Some of them interested in what kind of aerosols put into the atmosphere, and some of them are interested to build up the platform to communicate with the general public. So there are fundings into design website and trying to put scientists together, journalists together, writers together, and work together, write short articles which the public can read and understand, and also put effort on creating new short videos or graphics people can use in any of the events, and even thinking about to post those videos on YouTube or Twitter or whatever, those social media, and trying to engage more younger generation. So I feel for climate change, it's the same thing. We need to enhance the communication and to make the change really personal to everybody. And then everyone will think about what kind of action they are going to do. So I think we had a great discussion on these gaps between research and the action, how we can really start our action. And then, like I said, I really like Susan Solomon's 3 conditions to make a real action. Has to be personal, has to be perceptible. And then the third one, we have to have practical solutions. So let's move to solutions a little bit. I think Julie and Debashish already mentioned a little bit about solution. Let me put it this way. So as I mentioned before, there are 2 kinds of solutions. One is really based on technology. Do you think technology can really solve our crisis? Actually, our crisis is because of technology. Can you trust it? But there are good examples, like the ozone depletion I mentioned. It's because of the technology, because of our civilization, our development, industrialization. We have refrigerator, we have air conditioner, and all those air pollution emitted, which resulted ozone depletion. But because of science, we discovered this ozone hole in Antarctic. And we bring people's attention, and we put pressure on government. And then we put an action. After 4 years, we discovered ozone hole. We have this Montreal Protocol and banned all the pollution. And right now, the ozone hole is recovering, is healing. And if we keep this rate in 2065, it will be fully recovered. So this is another thing. Technology can really help. Science can really help. So when we talk about climate change, the solution we cannot just trust the technology solution, but what about nature-based solution? Can we just dive into this question a little bit more? What kind of solution you see in your field, and what kind of solution you think can really help? I mean, I can relate a lot you just discussed to my field for the carbon capture. That's actually another category for climate intervention. That's carbon dioxide removal. People are talking about deforestation. People are talking about ocean capture more carbon based on the biopump or other technologies, and trying to bring more carbon into the ocean and also into the terrestrial ecosystem. And even for the seaweed, that's another ocean solution too. People are saying, why don't we just plant all the seaweed, enhance the production of seaweed, and trying to convert the seaweed to fix it, to have those carbon actually stored in some way. Mm-hmm. So I think all your 3, the research are working on is highly related to this solution. So could you just elaborate more about that?
Sure. So even if you take all the photosynthesis in the world and we jacked it up a good bit, it's still not going to take enough carbon out of the atmosphere. So that's an important thing, is that you know, the lion's share of what we have to do is stop and reduce the emissions of CO2. So that is that's an energy conversion, that's a decarbonization of our energy system. And like, you know, that does not mean we're going back to the Stone Age of no energy. In fact, we're going in the other direction, even with conversions to EV, electric vehicles, et cetera. We are always going to be dependent on energy, right? So we need to find ways of producing even more energy than what we use now, but we need to do it in a way that is low carbon. So if there's a technology, if there's a place for technology, it's there, right? We need to upgrade our grid badly, our electric grid. There are ways to make sure that we, you know, the amount of electricity we lose through every mile of grid is depressing, depending on how, considering how much it takes to generate that watt of energy. We need storage. We badly need storage. So anything that you can do in terms, you know, anything that we're doing in terms of bringing solar prices down, that's great, but we still need to store it so we can use it at peak hours. There's a lot of technology solutions that are related to renewable energy and scaling that in a way that's just and conserves biodiversity. So I think that's a big place where technology has you know, the humans are a very smart, very adaptable, very persistent species, right? If anything in the last 100 years that got us into this tells us that we can do almost anything. That technology is not a barrier, right? You just have to turn the attention and turn the economy and turn everyone's to that. And sometimes that's just saying, you could make a lot of money if you figured this out, right? That might be just enough. They don't care about climate change on some level, but I'm telling you, someone is going to make a ton of money when they figure out how to fix the grid and how to store energy better, or reduce the prices of some of these renewable energy sources. In terms of other technology solutions, I'm not particularly keen on sort of carbon capture. It doesn't work terribly well. Maybe, I'm not going to shut it down. I might keep working. Maybe it'll work. What other things are we, like, you know, climate interventions? Not a fan of that. Not as an ecologist. I'm like, what are you doing?
I agree.
So those are the pieces in terms of a technology solution.
Yeah.
I think there's some other tools we have in our arsenal as well that are completely not technological, and one of those is the framing of the whole issue of climate change. So at the moment it's framed as we consume too much, we're using too much energy, but really I think there's another framing, and I'm not sure if anyone here is familiar with the works of a scholar called Farhana Sultana, but she talks about climate change as colonisation of the atmosphere. It's essentially, you know, oil and gas and coal companies that are making profits out of colonising the atmosphere. They are forever changing our atmosphere for future generations for the sake of profit. And we all know in a historical context that colonisation is bad. And going forward, framing climate change in that context hopefully gets it viewed as, you know, more commonly, or with more people that want to action it, as not a great thing to be part of. And the other thing is, at the moment, fossil fuel companies are privatising all their profits and they're socialising the cost of all of those emissions. And I wish it was framed in that way. I wish, instead of talking about fossil fuel companies as, you know, please can you pay some of the portion of costs for adaptation, it should be, we're billing you for your share of the costs. So there's, you know, the way that we think about the problem, I think, could be challenged or changed as well, in addition to, you know, technological solutions and other things as well. Yeah,
I'll just add one little thing about this. Because I worked a lot in algal biology, as Megan mentioned. I was part of this 8 or 10 year algal biofuel story that comes up, where we try with the idea you have large outdoor ponds of algae, and then you can turn that into diesel or whatever. It actually never takes hold because the economic arguments always fall apart when the last crash was due to fracking, creating all this cheap energy and so on. So it's very, very difficult to pursue biological solutions to at least putting a dent into the fossil fuel use with renewable energy. That's always been the case. There's always a bump at some point, and it goes back down. Companies are created, they go out of business. So it really is a cultural problem. People do not want to even take a little bit of a hit on their fuel costs, even though fuel costs are going up and down all the time. It's very difficult to convince people that you can use renewable energy from algae or seaweeds. And the final thing I'll say is that there's this sort of trick that oceanographers do where they see the iron, they see the ocean with iron, and these little guys called diatoms that are photosynthetic, they grow like crazy. The idea is, they sequester the carbon, and they sink to the bottom of the ocean. Unfortunately, most of it gets burned up on the way down, becomes carbon dioxide again, but it doesn't matter. What I showed you today is actually the world's most impressive carbon sequestration experiment. That is that Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt. It is literally created by human-driven climate change through the seeding of nutrients in the ocean from the Sahara and all the other stuff that's creating it. It's maybe 25 to 50 million metric tons. There's no seaweed climate change plan that could ever match that. So what happens is that we have this amazing, and the sargassum is really wicked hard to break down. So we work with engineers and chemists trying to break it down to make bioproducts, alginic acid, whatever. It's really hard to break down when it ends up on your shoreline, sits there for 3 weeks or more, and slowly breaks down. And these guys are also what's called vegetative reproduction. They break up and they grow and grow and grow and grow. This is an amazing carbon sequestration thing that's going on. And it's actually telling us that it's possible, but it's actually that becomes a pest because the amount of seaweed that grows. So in a way, we have to take these things into reality, right? Can we, that we're actually seeing one of the most amazing sort of seaweed growths ever in the history that we know of, and it is literally caused by climate change, but it's actually being thought of as a pest, right? And the sargassum is very stable. The sargassum sea's been there for thousands of years. So really, in a way, I don't know. I think it really comes down to a cultural shift, right? So we do have natural carbon sequestration going on, and it's that Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt I showed, and there's no humans ever going to create seaweeds in an aquaculture facility to ever come close to that. Yet it's considered a pest. So because it washes up on our shores and so on. So anyways, it's just good to keep a broad view of all of this stuff.
Wow, that's very interesting to know. Yeah. I have a last question, but before that, just by this very intriguing discussion, I just come up with a question, a very short one. I hope to get your opinion, 3 experts' opinion. So since you mentioned the technology-based, climate intervention is not a big fan of it, there are people talking about just a targeted regional climate intervention, and the goal is to protect the ecosystem. Such as Australia, they already have the project going on for 3 or 4 years. They are trying to brighten the cloud over Great Reef area, trying to protect the coral reef over there. What do you think this kind of climate intervention, geoengineering? So just short, because the time is almost up, but I'm just really curious. What's your opinion?
Probably Gretta.
Yeah. They haven't released the report yet. I am very excited to see the report. They've been doing this kind of experiments for 3 or 4 years already. It's Australia government supported this kind of field experiments. But in general, what's your opinion on this kind of field experiments?
You're talking to me?
Yeah.
Sorry,
Gretta, yeah.
It looks like you're looking at Julie.
Oh.
I don't actually know a lot about the cloud brightening. I know that many scientists are not huge fans of it. And I think the Great Barrier Reef, so I wrote the IPCC assessment for the Great Barrier Reef, and the trajectory of the reef is absolutely not good. It's just bleached again for, I think, the 6th or 7th time in 20 years or less, and the reef needs a decade or more to recover. We've also got massive bleaching on our the other coastline of Australia now, on our west coast with Ningaloo and another famous sort of coral reef there. So I'm all for action on climate change to protect the reef, but I'm not sure that cloud brightening is going to do that. But it's actually not a technology that I'm very familiar with.
Thank you. Thank you. Comments? Any?
I don't know anything.
Oh, okay. So
Actually, a few years ago, I was on it was a National Academy's panel on what to do about the corals in the world, and in fact, that was one of the technologies. Another one was putting a sort of membrane down on the reef to shade the corals from the sun, all sorts of stuff like that. As far as I know, all these people, this international panel, we all came to the same conclusion: so corals have been around for 250 million years or more. They've survived 5 large mass extinction events. So they're not going anywhere. They're actually quite robust, and there are corals that live in the Red Sea that up to 37 degrees Celsius water. So corals are not, where they live, if they have incredible amounts of stress, they're going to suffer as anything would. But they're actually very robust and resilient over time. So in a way, this notion of creating some sort of a solution that's only partial, I'm not particularly sort of fond of it. And the final sort of the bottom line that came from that report we all agreed upon is that stop fishing and stop tourism. So the reason why people love coral reefs, and they'll tell me, because they love to go diving on the reefs, and I go, that's great, But diving, you don't have to touch a coral, you can be in the water and safe. But the problem is you're part of an entire infrastructure that is going to outfit you, is going to have houses and cars and roads and all that development. That's going to harm the reef. And so this is sort of the bitter pill for anyone who works in the coral field. If you want to save a reef, leave it alone. One of the nicest reefs in Oahu, which is super populated, is this place we work called Kaneohe Bay on the North Shore, where there's a military base and it's a protected area. The corals are beautiful there. They have lots of bleaching events and lots of stuff, but no fishing, no commercial boats. That's what it matters. So really, if you want corals to survive, just leave them alone, right? Just no fishing and no human activity. But this has been very difficult to convince people that the beauty of nature can just be left alone. It doesn't have to be observed by human eyes to give it some value. And it is what it is. And that's what we all thought at the very end. It's a local problem, treat it locally. That is, reduce pressure on the reef and let them acclimate or adapt on their own. If you're lucky, they will actually recover over time.
that's great advice. Yeah. So I think our session will end at 10:10, right?
We are going to open for Q&A.
Yeah. So any questions?
The invasion of lionfish in Belize is greatly impacting the Turneth Atoll. Can you speak on that?
I think Belize has some of the nicest reefs in the area, and so I can't speak on the lionfish. I haven't worked in Belize, but yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know what to say about that exactly. We know that whenever you have a shift, and every ecologist knows we have a shift in the environment, that it'll favor some and disfavor others. So you'll see invasions and losses. But unfortunately, I've never been to that region, so I can't tell you more.
So I can talk broadly about the invasion of lionfish. So they are a unique predator on the corals, well, anywhere they are actually in the New World in terms of oceans. So most of the species that they were going to eat don't have anti-predator defenses against them, so they have a very unique way of kind of corralling their prey by opening up their gills and kind of herding them in. So none of the fish here have evolved with anything like it, and so they're very susceptible to being eaten. They're a generalist predator, so they eat a whole lot of different species of fish on the reef. So that gets to this, the best way for a coral system to survive is to be left alone. And this is a case where they're not being left alone because they're getting this other pressure by having this new novel kind of voracious predator. The lionfish invasion started in Florida, probably with an aquarium dump. So a lionfish you can still buy a lionfish at your local store if you keep a saltwater aquarium. And what probably happened in Fort Lauderdale is this, and maybe this happens more regularly, but in this case, it happened to occur in a habitat where for the lionfish could survive. Someone got tired of their tank and took it over to the canal and dumped it. So all the little fish that were in there, you know, they probably really, really loved their fish. They didn't want to, you know, so they figured out, we'll just do a little Finding Nemo and throw them in, right? And there was enough of them that they survived after a period of time and reproduced just fine, found the local reefs around South Florida, and they're very good dispersers. And they've moved as far north as North Carolina, and they've gone all the way through the Caribbean. Yeah, so that's a case where an individual action in this instance, or a series of, you know, maybe only 1% of all aquarium keepers would do that, but it only takes, with a fish that's very popular in the trade, only 1% turns into an absolute number of fish that are available, and they found their way into the environment and then spread on their own. They're very difficult to control once they're around. But sometimes they do fishing derbies. They're good to eat, and so they can kind of maybe keep that down. But that's a very wicked problem. It's a wicked, when that happens, you have a very classically defined policy wicked problem of, if we need to leave the reefs alone, but we need to fish down the lionfish, then you need to have people there to do it. And so it's a real problem.
Hi, my question's actually for you, Julie, on the same subject. But before I even ask, I want to thank you and the other speakers for being here today and sharing your time, your presence, and your insight. You got me thinking about nature-based solutions as I was listening to you speak. And my question is, what are some simple steps the average person who's not involved in scientific research or academia can take to contribute to nature-based solutions against environmental damage?
Right. So I mean that's a great question. So I would say a couple of things is to, if you own land, is to keep it in trees in our area, right? In New Jersey and in the northeastern U.S. and eastern Canada, I would say the same thing, is that you need to keep it in trees as much as you can. So clearing for lawns and keeping them nice and fertilized and pretty is pretty, but is not particularly helpful in terms of a lot of these things. Advocating or giving money to, there's a whole lot of private entities, nonprofit entities in New Jersey that are watershed associations that manage their watersheds and do it well. And so either participate in one of those is near you, or support them in some way. They do a really fantastic job of making sure that our watersheds are still forested the way they should be. They can restore some of them. Keeping the trees close to the rivers is also important. Those are all key things. There's growing evidence that a change in your diet is helpful for the climate, so a little bit away from animal products, particularly cattle, is a good solution. So just sort of reducing, that's a market-driven thing. You can reduce demand for that. So there's some good evidence now that that's the case.
Great, thank you so much.
May I add something? Because I'm working on food security, and I just want to see one thing. Can we just have less food waste? Particularly in U.S., 1/3 of the food production is waste and household. It's not transportation. It's not on the field. It's household. One third is wasted and household. People just tend to buy from Costco, large size, and they just tend to throw them in trash, and they don't like it. And just when you are doing that, before you're doing that, just think about those all have carbon footprint. Yeah, just be cautious about that.
That's a great point. You actually got me thinking, Dr. Mark. We have a leadership scholar who's working on a social action project to address the importance of food security, healthiness within our diets. And I think it'd be really cool for her to explore how that can be environmentalist too. So thank you for that. And I also love what you said, Julie, about the role of business in the environment, how if you actually just have the money to buy a good forest, that can be advantageous for the environment. So thank you so much. I so appreciate your insight and your response.
Thank you.
How can we prevent fossil fuel companies from continuing to emit emissions if we can artificially reduce the temperature?
That's a great question. That's actually why people, when people are against the climate intervention,
I think it might
that's a
become necessary,
major reason. If we have this kind of technology trying to just physically cool the earth, then those industries, they are not going to really reduce their carbon dioxide emission. Actually, all those private funding, those money get into this field. Most of the researchers, they will carefully look at where are those money from. If it's from like carbon industry, they refused to accept the money to doing this kind of research. But that's the biggest concern people are worried about. So the solution, I don't know, and people are talking about even if we have all those natural-based solutions, even we have started to reduce carbon emission, but we still have all those carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. To capture them down, it will require scale up of technologies and all the solutions, which we might not really have enough time to do it. So people still think maybe there will be a peak area, peak period. We do need this kind of solar climate intervention just to help for a couple of decades. Meanwhile, we have to do mitigation significantly, trying to reduce the carbon dioxide emission, and we hope after a couple of decades, then we can gradually terminate this kind of solar climate intervention and return back to normal. That's just what people are discussing about. But the question you bring up is definitely a big issue.
Yeah, and I've heard of the marine cloud brightening and aerosol injections. What other methods might there be?
There are other ones. So you mentioned about aerosol injection into stratosphere. That's mimic volcano eruption. And marine cloud brightening, that's more like mimic the ship track. And there's another one people call the cirrus cloud thinning, and trying to make the high cloud thinner and make more long wave radiation escape away from the Earth. So that's the third method.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So my question is actually similar to his in terms of the different climate interventions. Have you found, I guess, within your research, what the potential negative side effects could be? Because I know when I first learned about the whole, aerosol distribution of sulfide and something like that, it's the concern is like it will turn the sky yellow, and it would, of course, reduce the impacts of sunlight coming in, but what are the effects on plant life? Could we be essentially creating a new problem that was unforeseen by reducing the sunlight? Does that also reduce plant growth? Are there other consequences that we're not sure of? And if so, have you found any of the technologies so far that you think could be promising without those horrible possible alternative effects afterwards?
This is another fantastic question, and that's why I keep still doing research in this area. I don't think I have really a very solid answer to your question. Oh
yeah, I'm trying to remember this quote I saw about the climate interventions are like having chemotherapy for a headache. So it's it's a solution that has so many far-ranging unknown impacts that you should never really think about it when we know, it's literally the pull in case of massive emergency, not a reasonable response, right? So a reasonable response is things we've already talked about, leaving the reef alone and letting it kind of recover if it can. It's engaging an individual state level, federal level, international level policy in a real way. It's encouraging businesses to move towards decarbonization energy sources to solve some of those problems. Like there are plenty of things. It's just that we all, I don't know why, but we like this silver bullet solution, right? It's like, oh, we'll just do this to the climate, to the atmosphere, and everything will be okay. I'm like, no, we didn't get into this problem with one fell swoop. We're not going to get out of it with a single silver bullet. Like there has to be a whole suite. Some of them we can do very quickly, right now. Some of them, it's going to take a little bit longer to do. So I just, you know, in terms of the ecological impacts, I don't even know that I can, I don't know what the effects of plants are, and I've, you know, sort of seen some projections that say, oh, well, the right UV will go on through. And I'm like, well, that's great, but, you know, that it's not, they don't just need the right energy from the, plants need a lot of things. And they are, and so does the ocean, and so does every other thing that lives in the world, is they rely on what we call, you know, a very tight set of niche space that they need to be able to survive. So when you change the atmosphere, you change those rules of the entire game. And so what's the effect going to be? Good question, but I don't know. I don't like that. I don't want to run that experiment. We have solutions. We have solutions that work. Why don't we just do those? And there's no reason for us to go flying off the handle and reprogram the atmosphere.
I was reading something the other day about how humans, when we're problem solving, we always want to add something. We always want to do something rather than just take something away, which of course would be the solution in this case, would be just stop emitting or reduce our emissions into the atmosphere, but instead we want to stick other things into the atmosphere to try and counteract the original problem in the first place. And just something quick about nature-based solutions too. I know that term's really common, you know, I use it as well now, but it's kind of weird that we call it a solution, because it's not really a solution for climate change, because that sequestration of carbon in terms of fossil fuels happens over, you know, tens of thousands of years, but the time scale for like kelp and other species that are sequestering carbon is on, you know, years or decades. So the time scales are very, very different, and it's not really a solution to consider carbon sequestration into a plant material as equivalent as locking away carbon forever, like fossil fuel, like coal and gas and things like that do. So I think we really need to think about the timescales, and there's many good reasons for doing nature-based solutions for, you know, repairing and restoring natural habitats, coastal protection, all of that kind of stuff, but reducing emissions probably shouldn't be one of those.